Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We're still waiting on people to join, so we will get started in just about a minute or two, and we appreciate all of you for being right on time. You want to go ahead while we're waiting and type your name and your title and where you're from in the chat? That would be great. The chat you should see right underneath my video and to the left of the slide box. Hi, Michelle from Texas. Others? Oh, great to see so many people from so many different places. Welcome. Great, thank you. And again, we'll get started in just about another minute. If you would introduce yourselves in the chat, that's great. So happy to see you all. Okay, well, while we're waiting for a few other people to join, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Welcome, and again, thank you for your time and thank you for being here. My name is Patty Ryan. I represent the Early Childhood Quality Assurance Center. We're a national technical assistance center funded by the Office of Child Care, the Office of Head Start, and Health Resources and Services Administration. And I see some familiar faces, or not faces, but names in the chat. For those of you who don't know, the National Center works with state, territories, and tribes with our primary focus on ensuring and supporting healthy, safe, and high quality environments for children and supporting those who work for them. We're exceptionally excited today about this webinar, and anytime we get to connect with both our strengthening business practice trainers and other T&TA folks from around the country is just a real pleasure, and we hope that you find it helpful too. What I want to share is the information that we're going to talk about today will be made available in the coming days. We do have, and when I turn it over to Carolyn Foe, who's going to give some tips, show you where most of the links to the stabilization grant information is. We'll share that, and so with that, I'll turn it over to Caroline, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Patty. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to review a few things. First off, this webinar is being recorded. I also wanted to quickly review the layout of this platform. You'll see 6 icons at the bottom of the layout. They respond to each panel. You'll see the chat panel, which you can enter any questions, comments, or technical issues that you may experience. And then above that, you'll see the video panel, and then that's where you'll see the speakers. There's also a handouts panel that Patty mentioned that I will bring up later on throughout the presentation. It's right here, but I'm going to close it for now since that will be talked about more in depth, and you can access that throughout the presentation and at the end of the presentation as well. I'll just leave it up so you can download any links. And then finally, you'll see that we have next to our slides, we have a Wordly application, and that is for closed captioning. I will go into detail in a moment. I just wanted to cover some of our audio tips. So first off, we would like you to double check to make sure you have a strong internet connection. The sound comes from your computer, so you just need to check the volume on the speakers. You can refresh your browser or close out of the webcast and rejoin. For the best viewing experience, again, just confirm you have a strong internet connection, close out other programs in Windows, and then you might want to disconnect from a VPN. And again, just refresh your browser, come back, or close out and then come back in. And be sure to be using one of our preferred browsers, which is Edge, Firefox, or Chrome. And then, like I mentioned, there is a Wordly application over here to the right. And if you would like to use it, just please click on the Attend button. And I believe after that, you click on this little blue speaker icon to turn it on, and that way you can hear the speaker. But please keep in mind that this may overlap with the speaker's voice. So if you wanted to potentially hide this panel, you could click the X and then you'll see it X out. And then if you want to, you can obviously bring it back. And the way you might do that is looking at the 6 icons at the bottom of your layout. The first icon here refreshes all of the panels to the default layout. So if you accidentally close something, just hit the first little restore icon, and it will bring you back to your original layout. So with that, that's about everything you should know. Again, if you have any issues, please put them in the chat and I will respond as quickly as possible. So that's everything I have, and I will turn it back over to Patty.
Thanks so much, Caroline. I did want to share with you the agenda for today. We're so happy to be joined with our partners at First Children's Finance to share their wonderful expertise. And so we're going to talk just a little framing about the stabilization grants, what you should know. And then our goal really is to think about giving you tools to help providers so that you can understand what the stabilization grants are and what they're for. But we also have the opportunity to speak with center directors yesterday and with other providers and centers across the country. So Heidi and Molly, who are with First Children's Finance, are going to share with you some of the confusion we're hearing, so that as you think about rolling the stabilization grants out in your state, territory, or tribe, you can think about some of the communication messaging. And then we also have some tools. And as Caroline said, we have links to resources for you that will support the work that you're doing and want to also find out about what your needs might be, what you're thinking you need to help roll this out. But before we get started, we really want to know not just who's on the call, and thank you for introducing yourself in the chat, but we also want to know kind of what your role will be in the stabilization grant process. So Caroline, if you could bring up the first poll, please. Again, if you could, of these roles, which one serves best fits your job title, that'd be great, and just click in the slide. And it does look like we do have some folks who work as an administrator or in childcare, preschool, home visiting as a teacher, etc. While I think you'll find this webinar helpful, this webinar is really designed for training and technical assistance providers and or those who work in organizations that will be supporting providers. So if you could pull up the next slide, please, Caroline. So think about the organization that you work for and your role therein. Are you responsible for helping to develop the stabilization grant application in your state, territory, or tribe? Yes, no, or you don't know. And it looks like not everybody on the call is answering. So if you don't know how to answer the polls, if you'll just type in the chat and we'll give you some additional direction, but you should be able to click right into the PowerPoint. Okay, great. And bring up the next poll, please, Caroline. Okay, Erica, thank you for letting us know that. Are you responsible for delivering technical assistance or training to help providers access the stabilization grant in your state, territory, or tribe? Yes, no, or don't know. Okay, thank you. And the next one, please, Caroline. And is your organization going to be the organization responsible for administering the stabilization grant funds in your state, territory, or tribe? Right. Okay. Thank you for those responses. And it does look like the majority of folks on the call are training and technical assistance providers, and that's awesome. If you are a child care center director or administrator or family child care home provider, while you'll find the information helpful, we do have a webinar on Saturday designed for family child care providers, and we have a link to that as well. One of the things that we wanted to start with was just an overview of all of the funds that have become available for childcare during the pandemic and to help relieve some of the impacts felt by child care programs during the pandemic. There were three big pieces of legislation. The first, the Coronavirus Response and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act, was passed in March of 2020. There was a second piece of legislation, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations, or CRSA Act, that was enacted in December of 2020. Both of those funding streams came to states, territories, and tribes and may have been used for other types of grants, provision of resources, etc. The piece of legislation we're going to talk about today is the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARP Act, and you'll see a big portion of that legislation sets aside money for child care stabilization grants. And those grants are designed to go right to child care programs to really help reduce and hopefully help with some of the financial burdens faced by child care programs. They're also designed to really help stabilize the child care market that was already uh, not stable to begin with. This is a historic investment in childcare. We've never seen anything like this in I haven't in my lifetime. But with that being said, and Holly and Heidi and Molly will talk about it. It is very confusing for providers. So the more that you can help them understand the different grants and financial supports that are being made available in your state through these various funding streams, the better, because we don't want them to not apply for a stabilization grant because they may have applied for a grant that was made available through CURSA funding. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in depth. And again, Caroline has put the links to the all of this like this graphic and all of the stabilization grant information that's available to this point um, uh, in the pod that she showed you. And it's important to note and she just popped it up, so it's there, that First Children's Finance today is going to provide a general overview of the federal guidance and give you some tips in terms of translating that for providers. But again, there is a lot of confusion, so share with you some of that we've heard, and so that you can think about how you might support programs. It's also important to note that most states, territories, and tribes have not yet released their stabilization grant applications. So if you're talking to a provider and they say, oh, I already filled one out, something that you can help them with is determining if that indeed was a stabilization grant or if there are additional dollars that may be forthcoming that they can take advantage of. Again, it's not because states, territories, and tribes are behind. They're not. They're thinking very intentionally and giving great thought to how they can make these stabilization grants really meaningful. And uh, the idea is to make sure they're prepared so that when they do become available, they'll be ready to apply for them. We know that especially during some of the other funding opportunities, there were many programs who weren't prepared to apply, and so they missed out on the opportunities. So next slide, please, Caroline. The other thing to know is that these applications will be posted at different times. As I said, most have not yet posted them. States, territories, and tribes have until September 30th of 2022 to obligate the funds and September 30th of 2023 to liquidate the funds. So it may be next week that you may live somewhere in one of the handful of states that have already put their applications online. It may be next week, it may be next month, or it may be in the fall. That's something, if you can find out that information for providers and make sure they're aware of when they'll be available, if there's an application date that closes, all of that information will be helpful. And so with that, I think I'll turn it over to Heidi and Molly. Molly Sullivan with First Children's Finance, who's going to introduce herself and launch right in. Thank you.
So excited to be with you here today. I just want to confirm that my audio is working. Heidi, can you let me know? Great. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your extremely busy professional and personal lives to learn a little bit more about some considerations we hope you think about as you prepare to support childcare providers apply for the childcare stabilization grants. In addition to there being a diversity of people on the call today, there's also a diversity of businesses and programs who can apply for this funding. So throughout the presentation today, you'll hear Heidi and I speak about childcare businesses and childcare programs, but we want you to know that in that term, we're including out-of-school time programs, summer enrichment programs, before school, after school, childcare centers, faith-based, not faith-based, private, nonprofit, public. There's just a variety of businesses who can apply for these childcare stabilization grants. And we're going to use the term childcare business because it feels all-encompassing to us. So with that, I want to share our goal for today. What we hope to do today is provide some considerations for you as a support group for childcare businesses as they prepare to apply for childcare stabilization grants. What we're not going to do is tell you what to do, tell you how to do your very important job, or tell you exactly how to coach people as they fill out these grants. We know that you know your own clients and community best. We're just going to hopefully help you prepare yourselves as you then prepare childcare businesses to apply for this funding. With that said, we want you to know that we're providing some considerations, some implications, some things to think about. We're not, however, providing any legal, accounting, or financial advice. And if you or the businesses you work with have questions in those fields, you should reach out to certified professionals. Okay. Now on to the fun stuff. You get to meet us. So my name is Molly Sullivan. I'm the Director of National Initiatives at First Children's Finance. I have been with the organization for about 2 years, and I lead a team that's working on state-level work and systems change. Heidi will introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi Hagelbraid. I'm the Chief Program Officer at First Children's Finance. It's a delight to be with you today. I've been working for First Children's Finance for about 8.5 years and came directly from the early care and education field as a former center director. I thought it would be helpful just to set the context for today before we get too much further down the road, is that we really appreciate all of you who have joined today and really want to reinforce the idea that we're helping you to get ready and also to help others get ready. There is no state, no territory or tribe that is behind schedule in their planning or design of applications. You should not feel like you're behind schedule, nor should the folks that you are serving, working with and partnering with every day feel like they're behind. So the context that we want to set for today is this is all about getting ready. We are hoping that Molly and I will be able to give you lots of really great information, insights, and ways to get ready. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Molly to get us started.
Thanks, Heidi. So we're here today representing First Children's Finance and the unique perspective that we bring to working with childcare businesses. We're a 30-year-old nonprofit, and we focus on the business side of childcare. There are many organizations, probably some of whom you work with, who focus on supporting children, families, other community members who might utilize childcare, but we focus on that childcare business owner, that standalone family childcare provider, that small center director, that after-school program director who's working on supporting children and helping them grow and learn outside of a school day or in their preschool years. We have state offices in Minnesota, Michigan, and Iowa, but we also work with about 20 states right now, an ever-fluctuating number, growing by the minute, it seems, and Native nations who share the same geography as the United States, as all of these governing bodies are facing increased demands for support to stabilize and then grow the childcare supply where they live and work. We work at 3 different levels, which we'd like to tell you about next, just so you better understand the perspective that we are approaching this work from. In that dark blue bubble on the top, you'll see that we work with individual childcare businesses. We work to grow that childcare business owner's capacity to make business operation decisions using financial information and other information that they gather. We believe that every childcare business owner has the capacity to do this. They just might need some additional skills, training, or coaching, and we serve them in that capacity. In the little green bubble, you'll see the community level. We work with communities to address right-size solutions, or to help them build right-size solutions for the childcare crisis where they live. One of the most notable programs that we run is called the Rural Childcare Innovation Program, where we work with a wide array of community stakeholders to assess the childcare issues that are affecting their community and then build an action plan to address those issues. And then lastly, on the light blue bubble, you'll see systems level. We work with native nations, states, tribes, territories, etc., to help them build and strengthen childcare systems of support for childcare businesses where they live and work. And all of this is in service of increasing the sustainability and supply of quality childcare businesses. So as Patty has shared, we're here today to talk about the childcare stabilization grants funded through the American Rescue Plan. There is a significant amount of money for childcare businesses in that legislation, and it will be coming through grants that a state, tribe, or territory will administer. Part of the grants that is required in legislation is an application. So one of the things we want to talk about today is some of the confusion that first-time applicants for any type of grant or funding might be facing, as well as the different kind of navigation that businesses who have applied many times for different sources of funding, particularly maybe in the past 15 to 18 months, might be facing, as there are just a myriad of funding streams that they might be eligible for. There was federal guidance released in May 2021 that provides some additional information about these childcare stabilization grants. So we'll share some key takeaways with you today, some considerations for you to think about, some of the sources of confusion we heard, especially yesterday when we had the pleasure and honor of speaking with about 1,700 childcare business owners. And Heidi will go in depth on the allowable uses. We think that this might be an area where you want to take some notes in whatever way works for you, and just be prepared to answer questions for the businesses that you work with. So with that, go to the next slide, I think. There we go. So one of the things that Patty touched on and that Heidi will touch on is that we are hearing tons of questions from providers and from those who support them about the multiple funding streams that exist for childcare businesses right now. Just look at the alphabet of acronyms across that slide there in green. So there's the CARES Act, the PPP loan program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the SRSA program, and the American Rescue Plan. That is in addition to any municipal or state level or philanthropic funds which may be available where you live or where the businesses you work with operate. So while that is a great thing that there is so much funding for childcare businesses right now, what a challenge might be is that providers may feel uncertain. They may have been denied some funding in recent past and not want to pursue childcare stabilization grants. They may have hesitation just about not understanding what they're stepping into if they agree to take a childcare stabilization grant, and they just may have never applied for a childcare or for any kind of grant before. So you in your role can provide some clarity. In addition to that great infographic that Patty shared earlier in this presentation, you could do things like read the OCC guidance that talks about everything we'll share today. You could make referrals to any other CCR&R or support person or intermediary in the area if you feel that they really have a role in providing clarity around these grants, and or make a referral to whoever might be administering the grant when those grants are available. As Patty and Heidi stated, no one is behind. It is likely that wherever you live, the applications have not been released for childcare stabilization grants, though many other funding applications have already been released for other funding sources. Whoops, there we go. Excuse me, while I just, the slides got a little out of order there. Okay, we're back on track. Thanks for your patience. So the first thing that most people want to know about is whether or not they're eligible for a childcare stabilization grant. And one of the things that you may want to figure out right away if a business calls you and says, hey, I read about this, I heard about this, can I apply? Am I eligible? So there is some pretty broad eligibility for the childcare stabilization grant. What you'll want to do is when your tribe, state, or territory releases their grant application, you'll want to carefully read who is eligible where I live and how can I prepare some questions to help that business to determine if they're eligible. One of the things that the childcare stabilization grants are an opportunity to do is to receive funding for childcare businesses. That's important. It's also a simultaneous opportunity to help these businesses prepare for financing now and in the future. So one of the first pieces of TA you can provide is, well, how do you determine if you're eligible? What's your business entity type? What is your licensed status? Were you opened on this date or that date? What sort of requirements does this grant have? And do you meet those requirements? You want to be able to answer people's questions, but you also want to build their capacity to answer their own questions so that they can make determinations about future financial opportunities on their own because they know their business best. So a challenge might be determining a business's eligibility. Your tribe, state, or territory will release a grant application, and it should be pretty clear who's eligible and who's not, and then you can help walk providers through those questions to determine their eligibility. What a consideration for you to think about is to know if a childcare provider, for whatever reason, is not eligible where you live, it would be so lovely to have a little cheat sheet or notes about other funding sources that they might be able to apply for. Is there a philanthropic stream in their area that they could apply for? Is there other state funding? Is there something else in the county or city where they live or through a tribal entity that they might be able to apply for, just so that they know if this isn't a fit, there are other sources of funding for them out there. Another key takeaway, which we heard repeatedly when we were speaking with providers yesterday and when we talked to the states who we are working with already, is a question about taxes. I can't tell you how many times the question came up yesterday, so I want you to be aware of that as you prepare to talk with childcare businesses. There is no mention of taxing in the legislation. It is usually assumed that income is taxed, but you'll want to check with your state, tribe, or territory about any decisions they've made about childcare stabilization grants and how they may or may not be taxed. A consideration for you is if a provider asks you a question about taxes that you don't feel adequately prepared or comfortable to answering in that moment, think ahead of time, who can you direct those people's tax questions to? Do you have a contact where you could just pick up the phone and call? Or is there a great 1-800 number for these childcare stabilization grants where you live that you could direct them to? Is there existing legislation and statute that you could just have a link in the ready and email to people? Just think about how you'll handle tax questions when they come up. I was going to say when and if, but after yesterday, it's pretty clear that it's when and not if they have tax questions. So taxes is a great segue into grant award terms. One of the things that is lovely about the childcare stabilization grants and appropriate is that there's a fair bit of local adaptation. So each state, tribe, and territory is going to create a grant application that helps them gather information they need from providers to make grant awards. But there will also be some unique grant award terms that you'll want to be aware of because it's not a universal application. There's not one application that is being sent to every childcare business owner in the states, tribes, and territories across the United States. There are also, there's something to know that the state, tribe, or territory where you live will use a unique or one of 4 unique ways to make a determination about gathering business operating expenses. And there's 4 different ways they might choose. And I would love for Heidi just to jump in if there's anything that she wants to add about these cost estimation models. So the childcare stabilization grants will be collecting information in some way about childcare businesses' operating expenses. When they do that, they will then use that in some way to make a grant award. And they might talk about or think about or calculate childcare business operating expenses using a cost estimation model, like a calculator that may exist. They may create or use an existing formula that's based on childcare enrollment in that business and the region in the state, tribe, or territory where that business is located. Think about the differences that if the market rate survey is something you're familiar with, that information is often broken out into regions. So that might be a way of thinking about the region where the business is located. Your state, tribe, or territory might issue a survey to licensed childcare providers in the area, collecting some basic information about operating expenses, and then use that for this grant award determination. Or they might work directly with a wide variety of providers across the state, sort of sampling them to say, oh, if you're a provider in a metro area and you're a provider in a more rural area, if you're a family childcare provider, an after-school provider, or a center, what are each of your operating expenses, and then use that to create a type of formula for grant award estimation. Heidi, is there anything else you want to say about those cost estimation models?
I would just add that as we were talking about at the beginning of our webinar, that no state, no territory, no tribe is behind. This is the work that they're doing right now. So as an intermediary organization, if you're a child care resource and referral agency, or you're working directly with child care businesses, just know in the background, the state CCDF administrator, the state staff, the tribe or territory staff, the decision makers, they're crafting this process right now. So that's the hard work that they're doing right now. I think it would be helpful for you to understand the basis of their decisions so that you can be just really conversant in trying to help childcare businesses as they apply for these opportunities understand how the state, territory, or tribe arrived at the application formula, estimation, cost model, etc., just so that you have a full understanding of how to explain that to other folks. Back to you, Molly. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. I think it's also important to note, as Heidi shared, that the childcare stabilization grants may ask childcare businesses questions they've never really asked them before. And that could feel intimidating, overwhelming, invasive. You pick the negative word. It could feel that way to the childcare businesses who you work with. And we want you to be prepared to say, they're asking this information to gather useful information to make this current funding decision, and then hopefully better understand the cost of operating a childcare business, especially during a time of financial crisis. So they're gathering information that will help them understand a business's operating expenses. I want you to provide clarity once you see your state, tribe, or territory's childcare application that they're not seeking information to judge a childcare business's operations, and just to provide that clarity if someone is confused about why those questions are being asked. In addition to having some local customization around how operating expenses are used to determine grant awards, each state, tribe, and territory also has their own timeline for when the child care grant applications are released, for when the child care stabilization grants are distributed. So the timeline is important to know. There's also some local customization around monitoring. Sometimes monitoring can have a really negative connotation. So we hope that you step into this role that you're about to take on and share, this is an opportunity for you to be prepared for grant reporting in the future. If this is a childcare business's first time applying for a grant, they should know that typically grants need to be reported out on, both financially and with narrative information. How did you use this money, and what was the impact of that money in your business? So just prepare to understand what monitoring requirements will exist in the state, tribe, or territory where you are, so that you're able to build that child care provider's capacity to report out. Oh, yep, I can provide a financial statement. Yes, I can provide a grant report. Sure, I can speak to your board about the impact of this grant in the future when they're successfully applying for grants in the future after successfully getting a child care stabilization grant. And then the last note we want to make is that the child care stabilization grants, there may just be one big grant pool where you live, And they might pool the grant out into different target communities, target types of businesses, target timelines. The guidance from OCC says that each state, tribe, or territory can adapt the grant application for each cycle that they run. So just know that there might be targeted pools of funding for providers who you work with. And when your state, tribe, or territory releases the applications, it'd be great for you to be familiar with who they're seeking to support, so that if you're working with a particular childcare business owner who has been unsuccessful in seeking some other federal funding, you could reach out to them and say, hey, this is an opportunity specifically for you. What would be such a tragedy as if this funding that was specifically set aside to stabilize childcare businesses wasn't fully applied for and utilized because of any sort of confusion or uncertainty that childcare providers might be feeling. So this is getting close to my handoff to Heidi. This is just an overview slide. Prepare your questions because I'm sure Heidi will answer most of them in the upcoming slides. There are multiple allowable uses for childcare stabilization grants, and they cover so many different categories of operating expenses. I do want to flag for you that when we were speaking with childcare providers yesterday, someone asked for a definition of what an operating expense is. So you may be working with large chain centers who have applied for so many financial resources before. They might not have a single question, and they are very familiar with what the term operating expense means. But you might also be working with brand new childcare businesses who opened during a international pandemic, and operating expenses is just a term they're getting used to. So you have the ability not only to explain what operating expenses are, but say, these are some of your operating expenses in this list here. And these grants are meant to cover some of the expenses that it's been tricky to cover because you've been operating in a health and financial crisis. So the allowable uses are personnel, paying the people who run and operate the program, rent, utilities, facilities, insurance that comes with being in a building, PPE, cleaning and sanitation supplies. There was a huge philanthropic effort to cover PPE for childcare providers when the crisis first emerged, but that might have waned in recent months, and childcare providers are still trying to cover those expenses. So make sure they're aware of that. Equipment and supplies and goods and services are very broad categories, which Heidi will go over in the future. Mental health services for the staff. Sorry, I live in a flight pattern and there's a huge plane going overhead. I hope you couldn't hear that. And then past expenses. And that might be expenses incurred before the before the American Rescue Plan Act passed, but during the COVID-19 crisis. So a challenge might be, you're seeing the slides here that we presented to the childcare businesses yesterday so that you'll know what they saw. So we're saying that a childcare provider might have a challenge in that they might be reporting information on this or collecting information on this for the very first time. Even if they're a long-standing childcare provider, they might never have applied for financial support before. So you want them to know that they have the information that they need to report expenses. They have checks, they have bank account statements, they have rent bills, they have the sewer bill, they have the information they need, and their ability to fill out this application, they've got that ability. They just might need a little clarification and some information on where to find each of these categories of expenses. So yesterday we encouraged them, as you can see on the last line there, we encouraged them to ask all the questions that they have. As Heidi is speaking, we encourage you to ask all of the questions you have about allowable expenses because we want people to seek and receive this funding. The last thing that I'll touch on today is reporting and monitoring. States, tribes, and territories may ask questions both in the application and in subsequent sort of follow-up reporting of questions that they don't typically ask childcare businesses. You can see in the guidance that there's some demographic information that will be asked, which may or may not have been asked before of childcare businesses in your state, tribe, or territory. So we just want people to feel prepared to answer those questions and to answer those questions without fear about how that information might be used. So you, in your role as an intermediary, will want to be familiar with what reporting information is requested both in the application and then as part of any reporting that is required once people receive the funding. A lesson learned from the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program grant, is that some businesses applied for and received the PPP loan, a large chunk of which was forgivable as long as they had the information available to prove that they were worthy is such a strange term, to prove that their expenses were eligible for forgiveness. And they didn't have that information in hand. So what could have been more like a grant ended up being a true loan. So you just want to work with providers so that they understand what they'll be asked to share out in the future so that they save, store, and track that information. This is an opportunity to help childcare businesses build internal systems of monitoring and compliance that don't need to be intimidating and don't need to be complex. It might be as simple as gathering emails in a dedicated email folder or storing actual receipts in a manila envelope, whatever works for them, as long as they're ready to share things out in the future. With that, I'll turn it over to Chief Program Officer, First Children's Finance, Heidi Hagelbraid, and she will provide a deeper dive into allowable uses. Take it away, Heidi.
Thank you, Molly. There are great questions coming in the chat already. And so now that I'm talking, Molly's going to answer them as we go along. But I'm going to jump right into each one of the different eligible spending categories that is outlined in the legislation and the guidance for the Child Care Stabilization grants. These will be consistent across your state, territory, and tribe. There cannot be more of them, but there certainly could be less. And so I will talk a little bit about that as we go here. So the allowable expense categories that we already highlighted in a previous slide, these are all of the eligible uses for the Child Care Stabilization grants. So if you have expenses or things that fall outside of them, they're likely not eligible expense categories. And as we talked about, each state, each territory, each tribe is designing its application processes. And those entities have some flexibility. And so they may include only a few of these as eligible expenses. Like I said before, there can be no more, but there could be less of them. We're going to go through each one of them one at a time so that you understand what those categories entail and how to prepare businesses to be able to identify those costs, track them, and be successful in their applications for the stabilization grants. And we'll spend a little bit of time on each one of them, so hopefully we're answering some of the questions that you've already indicated in the chat. So let's first start with personnel costs. And I wanted to make sure that you are aware of that these are any expenses related to the payment, compensation, wages, and benefits for people who are working for the childcare business. This is inclusive of family childcare centers, out-of-school providers, after-school providers, and summer enrichment providers. Payroll and personnel costs may be found in payroll records. So if you are a business that is working with employees, obviously you probably have a regular payroll report that is provided to the business every 2 weeks or every month or so that outlines all of the benefits, all of the costs for the wages that were paid to employees. Similarly, if you're providing benefits like health insurance, dental insurance, or other types of insurance, there will be a regular report from that provider that indicates the amount of money paid by the employer on behalf of the employee's benefit package. So those will outline the employees and what the employer portion of those payments were and that were paid on behalf of the benefits. Personnel costs may also include something referred to broadly in the legislation as premium pay. And so if you think about what that means, that might be staff bonuses, that might be hazard pay, that might be signing bonuses for employment to attract and retain people into new jobs in the childcare business. It may also include staff bonuses. So any and all of those expenditures are eligible in the personnel cost category. And then finally, the last thing that I want to touch on is any vaccine-related personnel costs. So as employers have given paid time off for people to travel to and from vaccination appointments, or time off to recover from the side effects of a vaccine reaction, those also are eligible costs that could be included. Now let's talk about family childcare, because you work with lots of different childcare businesses, and not everyone has a clear payroll report to refer to. So any pay that a provider of family childcare owner entrepreneur takes from the business is considered payroll. And there is another webinar coming up this Saturday with Tom Copeland and myself and the crew here from the Office of Child Care and the ECQA, talking specifically to family child care providers about some of their concerns and how to calculate and make assumptions about payroll for child care providers who happen to be in family child care or family group care. So there's additional information that'll be available for that. But broadly, you're going to want to prepare yourself to understand what some of the questions that are going to come from businesses are. And I think that that is going to be one of them that you are going to need to make sure that you're comfortable answering and have some ideas about how to answer questions about family, childcare, claiming payroll in personnel expenses. The next category is rent, utilities, facilities, maintenance, and insurance. So this includes any payments for the home or the facility where the childcare business is located and operates. So clearly for a home-based provider, family childcare entrepreneur, that is going to be their rent or their mortgage payment or the time-space percentage of that allocation. For a child care center, an after-school program that has a facility, that's going to be any of the things that you see on the right-hand side of the screen that have to do with the operation of the facility and the other related costs in keeping the doors open and the lights on. So those may include mortgage or rent payments. And for family childcare, that's going to be a portion of a mortgage payment that is allocated to the childcare business. That's called a time-space percentage. It may be any fees related to late payments for rent or mortgage payments. It will include liability insurance, property insurance, general insurance for the facility and its program and operations. Utilities expenses will include things like water, sewer, garbage, internet, cable, broadband access. Any of those costs are also eligible inside of this cost category. It may include maintenance expenses or any of the charges made that you have had to shift some of the physical environment to be compliant with health and safety protocols due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, your state, tribe, or territory may also allow the cost of minor improvements, maintenance, or renovations to respond to the pandemic. And so this is something where you're going to want to get really clear guidance from the entity that you are working with for your child care stabilization grants. That will be state government, tribal government, or territory government that is making the decisions about what is allowable and what is not in this category. So make sure that you are clear about what is included and what is not in your specific local area. Goods and services is a very broad category and lots of things fit here. And so if you have a childcare business that is asking about a particular expenditure, this is most likely where it might fit if it doesn't fit in other places. It includes payments or purchases or supplies to help run the childcare business during the COVID-19 pandemic. It may include food, snacks, food service supplies like dishes and supplies. It may include any of the consumable supplies that you need to keep the wheels turning inside of a childcare business, including diapers, wipes, paper towels, paper plates, all of the things that sort of are consumed inside of a care setting, all are eligible here, including toys and games for indoor and outdoor use, cribs, sheets, other sleeping supplies, books, workbooks. It may include learning materials, things that support curriculum, and it also will include any licensing fees, any expenses related to the licensure of the building, facility, or program. And it also will include any kind of consumable materials that are used for learning and education purposes. The next category that we want to talk about is equipment and supplies. Again, it is payment or purchase of supplies or materials to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, many childcare businesses had to shift and change and may still be in that shift and change. And we don't know exactly what the future holds for all of us as we kind of return to normal, if we will. But for many people, it has increased their need to be more effective and efficient, to utilize more infrastructure inside of their childcare business, whether that is in service to the education and care of children, or in service to the operation of their childcare business. So in this category, it may be accounting software to help in this exact instance. If you're going to utilize the childcare stabilization funds and you need to restrict the amount of spending to these cost categories, accounting software is going to help you do that. It may be the purchase or the payment of payroll software and services. It might allow you to track data that you have to report to a public health entity, software or technology that allows you to be able to operate more efficiently and effectively. It may include health monitoring equipment if programs are still doing temperature checks, if they are still monitoring health and safety protocols in their local area. That equipment may also be included in these cost category. And it may be an update or the purchase of computers, smartphones, tablets, especially as programs have shifted to serve school-age children in new and different ways to support their distance learning. These are all pieces that are important to be included and thought of in equipment and supplies. As you know, school-age kids have been in different care settings for different hours of the day, and some of these materials have not stood the test of time. Programs and childcare businesses are replacing technology and equipment because of the heavy rotation of use that they've been under over the past 15 months. So if your childcare business needs to replenish that supply or update those equipment, this is a great category to consider. The next category is about PPE, the personal protective equipment, cleaning, health, and safety practices. This is payments for supplies or materials or services that keep your childcare business, whether it is a childcare center, family childcare home, after school, summer enrichment, out of school time program, any and all of those scenarios are important to think about how they have been spending and need to spend to be able to maintain healthy and safe environments for care and education. These include sanitizing wipes, bleach, soap, other cleaning and disinfecting materials. It includes personal protective equipment like face shields, masks, and disposable gloves. It may include training on proper cleaning and disinfection processes for staff and employees. It may also include hiring professional cleaning companies, janitors, or cleaning services, particularly if there's an outbreak or a program has to close for temporarily and they take the extra steps of making sure that the environment is fully professionally sanitized. That's a place to put these expenses. It may also include background checks and the safety and health training that is required of employees inside of the child care business. The next category talks about mental health services, and there was questions in the chat before I started talking about this. This is something that I want you to really deeply consider encouraging in the childcare businesses that you work with. The folks who have been doing this work have answered the call to stay open, and many of them never closed a day throughout the entire past 18 months. They've been dealing with traumatized families, traumatized children, and they themselves have experienced high levels of stress and trauma. Mental health services are an important part of them maintaining a healthy environment and culture inside of their childcare business. And this is probably not a category that they are used to spending money in. And if they are spending money here, it's probably in service of children in the program. So if you can, help them to consider ways in which they can support their employees or themselves as family childcare entrepreneurs to make sure that they have the support and mental health support that they need during this very difficult time. This is not over by a long shot. So not only have they been providing care, they have been sort of taking on all of the stress of caring for very stressed out families, very stressed out kids, engaging with stressed out employees. And by the way, in the middle of the night, they've been trying to figure out how they're going to make payroll next month. They've been trying to figure out how they're going to pay the rent, how they're going to keep the lights on. This is something that your role as an intermediary organization is critical to being able to help them think about how they can afford these supports. It creates a culture and an environment inside of their business that allows them to attract and retain staff that they desperately need everywhere across the country. So really encourage them to think about how they can use these child care stabilization grants to maybe spend in a place where they haven't been spending. Many childcare businesses are not able to extend benefits to their employees. Many family childcare entrepreneurs are not able to pay for some of the benefits that they would really like to have. And so this is a good opportunity for them to be able to think about how to do some support in their childcare businesses for themselves and for their staff. Finally, our last category, the seventh one, is past expenses. And I think there's a really important caveat to explain here. It is inclusive as a category. However, every state, every tribe, and every territory has the flexibility to include this as a spending category or not. So as you look at your application that comes from your state, territory, and tribe, as you are helping others to complete it successfully, you're going to want to know whether or not your state, territory, or tribe has included past expenses as an allowable category. They may or they may not. And if they do include it, it is only past expenses for the other 6 categories, okay? So I can't say I need a new Mercedes this year. I'm going to purchase it with my child care business stabilization grant and catch up on those payments of my Mercedes that I missed over the past 6 months. That's not an allowable expense. If your state, territory, or tribe does allow past expenses to be included, what they will have to be is in those other 6 categories of personnel, mental health services, facilities, maintenance, etc., those types of things. What you're going to have to encourage the childcare businesses who reach out with questions is how to understand this, and if it is allowable, how they can gather information, receipts, payment proof to be able to back up the request for that as an allowable expense. I think now is the time to move on to our next transition, and that is preparing for what comes next. These slides are in the language of being read by a provider, but they are also applicable to you in your role as an intermediary, as a technical assistance person who may receive questions from childcare businesses. Number one is making sure that you fully understand the opportunity that is being provided by your territory, your tribe, or by your state. Remember, Molly said way back at the beginning of this presentation, there could be multiple streams of funding just inside of the Child Care Stabilization grant process. So there's a lot of flexibility. It's designed for states, territories, and tribes to meet the unique demands of childcare businesses in their local area. And because of that, there might be variety. It's your job as an intermediary to make sure that you fully understand all of the opportunities. One of the things that happened yesterday when we were talking with childcare centers, and I anticipate it will happen again this weekend when we talk with family childcare providers, is confusion about all of the different opportunities. There is CARES Act funding that's still flowing. There is SRSA Act funding that is still flowing. What you want to make sure is that you fully understand what the American Rescue Plan, the ARPA Act funding, what the stabilization grants are and are not in your local area. There's going to be a lot of questions about this. And so make sure that you are crystal clear about what the opportunity is and what the eligibility is. There may, again, a reminder, there may be multiple pools and they may have different kinds of eligibility. So make sure that you are fully conversant about what all the opportunities are in your state, territory, and tribe. This, of course, is a provider-facing slide. We want them to complete the applications. This is when they get stuck. One of two things is going to happen, and we hope that the second of these two things happen. Number one, they're going to get stuck and give up. Number two, they're going to get stuck and call you. What we really hope is that they do that. They call you and they ask the questions. And so as best you can, if you're working with providers to complete these applications, create a cheat sheet inside of your agency that is specific to the territory, the tribe, or the state in which you are working with, so that your staff really understand all of the different nuances of the different applications that may exist in your state. We have been encouraging them to ask questions and to request technical assistance, to ask for a translation of a form, to ask for a translation of an explanation if needed. That's a really important piece, is encouraging them to ask questions, and that if you don't know the answer, that you can assist in going to find that answer and bring the answer back and the information back to them as best you can. You're going to want to also encourage them to establish and maintain financial tracking systems. We're going to talk about that in depth in just a moment. But what that means is that every entity that has an application process will be asking for different monitoring and reporting information. So as you recall, earlier in the presentation, Molly covered that in depth. That has a lot of flexibility, and it's going to vary from state to state, tribe to tribe, and territory to territory. So make sure that you have a really full sense of what the application requirements are and what folks will be asked to report back to the state government, tribal government, or the administrators of programs in territories or tribes. And let me just say that the caveat here is that you don't need everyone to have expensive, complicated software. You really just need a methodology that is accurate. And so we have some resources that are going to be available on the website where this webinar and some other resources will be posted that you can utilize for family child care businesses, at small child care centers in particular. Maybe programs that are less sophisticated, they will have access to some resources that might be really helpful to them. On this this slide here, it's not our last slide, but we're getting close to the last slide. As you help people to think about how to apply, these are some really great pieces of advice to give them, is to understand the capacity that they need. Remember, one of the things that is an allowable expense is building up the capacity to be more effective and efficient. Do they need some software? Do they need a new computer? Do they need some technology that's going to help them to be able to monitor and track this information, including their spending? What is the burden, and how can they meet that inside of their child care stabilization grant? We want them to think about how the stabilization grant helps leverage the next opportunity in their economic recovery. You're going to want them to be aware of the monitoring requirements. So anything that they have to keep track of throughout the grant term, whatever that may be, and making sure that they have a way, a methodology, simple or complicated or somewhere in between, to be able to track that. As they work through the application and the attestations, there are 3 attestations that the federal legislation requires: that they are compliant with the CDC, that they meet 2 other pieces of criteria. So you're going to want to make sure that people fully understand what they are taking, as they accept that grant. What are the strings that come with it? And you should make sure that you know those 2, that you know what those 3 attestations are, and are aware of any others that your state, territory, or tribe may layer on top of it. On the bottom row, let's talk about the reporting requirements. This is a point in time where government agencies, tribal, state, and territory are really trying to understand childcare business in a new and different way. They may ask people to report back to them in ways that they have not before. And so helping childcare businesses be prepared to track and monitor those kinds of information over the grant term and to be able to successfully and accurately report them is going to be very important. One of the biggest things that I think is going to be important to cover is the staffing costs. So those childcare businesses that have formal employees, staffing costs are an important part. Many states, territories, and tribes are lifting up workforce compensation as a major issue that they are trying to address in the child care stabilization grants. And so if that is happening where you live, you're going to want to make sure that the grantees or the applicants, both actually, understand what kinds of information they're going to have to track about staffing and compensation so that they can do what's the next piece, is allocating their costs, that they are tracking the application of the grant to the appropriate category of cost that is identified. So there are 7 of them. If your state, territory, or tribe allows for all 7, it's 6 if past expenses are not included. How can they allocate those costs? And if you're working with a program that does not have a sophisticated accounting system, how can you help them utilize some of the resources that are going to be made available to track those cost allocations over time? So here's this interesting time that we are in. The majority of states, territories, and tribes have not published their applications yet. There's only a handful of them that are out there. So while they are designing their processes, designing their applications, you have a really important job to do, as do the potential childcare businesses who are recipients of the child care stabilization grants. This is a really, really good time for you to support these processes: planning for the application and gathering information. Molly talked about some of the lessons learned from the Payroll Protection Program, the PPP program, and then also what we learned from the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, that happened very early in the pandemic. Childcare businesses were not ready. And because it was time sensitive, especially the first time that those programs rolled out, family childcare and small childcare centers, small operations weren't prepared. And so they missed out on some of those opportunities. That's not going to be the case here. I think the child care stabilization grants are specifically designed for childcare, not all businesses. And so there's some more ease of timeline here. But we do want people to be ready to apply. So if you are encountering programs that have never applied for a grant, a loan, or financing before, there's some homework to be done. And now is the perfect time to start thinking about what those things might be. You're going to want to encourage people to think about how to intentionally use this opportunity to think ahead. It's not just an opportunity to stabilize for right now. It's what can this child care stabilization grant do for me? How can I leverage it to more quickly recover in this economy? How can I use this to leverage other opportunities that I see inside of my business? We want, first and foremost, to create financial sustainability and stability, but there are lots of ways and strategies to do. This is also a place for childcare businesses to think about how to become more efficient and effective, especially in the areas of financial compliance related to accounting or tracking, so that they can be compliant in this opportunity, that they use this opportunity to sort of bring their business to the next level, if they so choose, to be able to use this as a launch pad to another process that might be available to them somewhere down the road. And then we have been telling people when we're talking directly at the programmatic level to reach out to you, those of you who are on the call today, making sure that they have identified intermediary organizations who can assist you with business and finance questions. So that is the heart and soul of what First Children's Finance does, but we're not everywhere. And so you can be guaranteed that people are going to rely on their trusted relationships. And for many of you who are in attendance today, that means you're going to pick up the phone call and get the questions that that people are going to encounter as they work on their applications. We're going to talk about tools that are available. There are several of them forthcoming that will be on the website where this webinar is posted. And then also you can always reach out to First Children's Finance. Our website has a lot of free tools that are available for download. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Patty Ryan.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Heidi and Molly, for that wonderful information. And we're going to continue, if you would, to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll pull Holly and Heidi and Molly back up to answer some more of your questions if need be. And they've been following the chat and also putting the answers in the chat box. There are a few sources of information that we want to draw your attention to that will help you stay informed of the stabilization grants and other funding opportunities available in your states, tribes, or territories. And the first that I want to draw your attention to is childcare.gov. If you've not ever been to childcare.gov, it's that simple. That's the URL. And it's where you can go to find out about stabilization grants and other supports that are available in your state or territory. And Caroline just put the file pod with the links back up, so that's there. Once you go to childcare.gov, you're going to navigate to it says COVID-19 resources. You're going to navigate there, and there you'll see buttons that say for families and for child care providers. If you click on the button for child care providers, it's a list by state and territory, and each state and territory has resources available to help providers navigate through COVID-19. Among the link that is going to be there is once the stabilization grants are released, the link to the application for the stabilization grant will be placed there. Right now, as I said, and Heidi and Molly alluded to, there are just a small handful of states that have made their applications public for stabilization grants. There may be other funds available as the presenter shared with us, but there'll be a separate row that you'll find for stabilization grants. So that's one way to find out about stabilization grants. The other way within your state, territory, or tribe, I'm sure, is because you are in a position of helping and working with providers, you will likely receive information as well. So again, to reiterate, if your applications have not yet been posted, they're not behind. State, territories, and tribes are working very hard and diligently to make them happen. We just want to make sure that you have the resources available that you need before they become available in the area where you live. The second place where you'll be able to find information is a child care stabilization grant page. And on this page, you will find information both for providers, so you'll be able to click and find information specifically for providers. And you'll also see a button for T&TA providers. This is the page where this webinar will and accompanying resources will be posted. So again, we'll get them out just as soon as they're 508 compliant, and we can get them up on the website, and we'll make sure that you also have links to all of the information that we shared with you today. And with that, the PowerPoint does have both resources for childcare.gov, the stabilization grant information that I just shared with you. There's a really nice overview of stabilization grant guidance that would be a good thing for you to read and maybe even carry with you. But the key is to remember that what we've shared with you today and what you'll find on these resources is federal guidance. There can be additional state, territory, or tribal guidance criteria as well. So make sure as soon as the applications are released, you really dive in and understand all of the information. And with that, I'm going to stop there and just see if additional questions came through that maybe we need to pop Heidi and Molly back up for, or if we're good to go ahead and open the polls. And I think with that, we do have some polls for you that we'd like to hear from you in terms of what you need more of. And the first is how much was your understanding or awareness of the American Rescue Plan Act stabilization grant funding improved? Significantly, moderately, a little bit, or not improved at all? So if you would answer that. And I'm wondering, Caroline and Molly and Heidi, if you wouldn't mind while they're answering that, if we can pop you back on so that as soon as we're done with these, you can also, we can end with some last words from our presenters. Okay, thanks, Caroline. If you want to bring the next poll up, please. And how much has your understanding or awareness of strategies to help programs prepare to access stabilization grants improved? Significantly, moderately, a little, or not at all as a result of this webinar? And again, you just click on the poll to answer the question. Looks like a few of you might be having a little bit of difficulty. And then lastly, how likely will you use at least one of the strategies mentioned on this call? And before you all log off, for the training and technical assistance providers, what other materials and resources do you need that would be helpful for you to help providers in obtaining the stabilization grant? If you could type those into the chat, that will be really helpful for us. And also any other comments or thoughts about the webinar will be helpful. And with that, I'll turn it over to Molly. If you have any last words of advice or recommendations to the folks on the phone.
I just want to say something that Heidi and I said yesterday to the childcare businesses who were on the call, which is you get a little bit of an extra pat yourself on the shoulder, or give yourself a hug, or have an extra cup of coffee tomorrow morning as a reward for being here. You are likely out way ahead of the state, tribe, or territory application where you live. So you are just beginning to collect your information. Think of this as the starting point of a journey, not the end point. You'll want to constantly monitor your state childcare stakeholders who you work with, the networks that you are within, the state, tribe, or territory childcare typical websites where you live, because these applications will likely come out in the next few months, but that could be anywhere from July through January. That's really the next few months. Several of you asked about the timeline for when applications would be available, and state, tribes, and territories don't have a required start date for these applications. So begin talking to childcare providers if you wish about the fact that someday these applications will exist, or don't if you think that will be confusing to them. But prepare your own self to answer the questions. Prepare yourself to answer questions that will come your way. You saw the questions in the chat. If those weren't your questions, know that they might be questions where you live. We want to thank you for all the work you have done up to this point and all the work you are going to do to support childcare businesses, new, long-standing, or somewhere in between, as they prepare to seek this funding to stabilize their business. Heidi, what would you like to end with?
I would just build off of what Molly said, and I think call back to something that Patty said right at the beginning of our webinar, is that not before in my career in this field have we seen this level of investment in the business side of childcare. For the first time in many places, it was clear the important role that childcare plays in the economy of our country. And so I am thankful for this investment, and I really want to encourage all of you to think about ways in which to help the childcare businesses in your local community be ready to apply, because this is not something that they're used to. This is not something that has ever been available to them before. This is brand new territory for all of us. And it's nice and still sort of confusing to have this long runway of planning and preparation. We're not used to having that. And so use this opportunity to think about how you can prepare yourself to best serve the childcare businesses that you have relationships with, to educate yourself and get ready to be able to answer questions or to identify people who can help you to do that. And we just thank you for everything that you've done to keep childcare businesses afloat and operational during this time. And hopefully, this is the first of many investments in what we know is desperately needed for our sector. And so I am so glad that you're here with us today and wish you well in your journey to encouraging others to apply for the funds and to utilize them well. And if we can be of assistance to you, Molly and I are happy to help you think through ways and strategies to engage folks. This is very much a topic of conversation in state government, in CCDF administrator circles, in the advocacy community. But once the American Rescue Plan Act passed, childcare businesses are not paying attention to it. They are busy trying to rebuild their businesses, trying to keep the doors open, trying to attract teachers back into their programs. This is not top of mind for them. So anything that you can do to promote and encourage them for their applications is phenomenal. So best of luck, and we hope to be able to support you in your work along the way too.
And I just want to thank Molly and Heidi for their expertise, and people are certainly so grateful for your work, as is in the chat. I do want to say that Zelda put in, and she'll put in again, the Quality Assurance Center email. We tried to answer a lot of questions. If we didn't get to your question, you can send your question to that email box. And if we're able to answer it, we certainly can, or direct you to additional information. And with that, we ended a little bit early, but we sure do hope that this was useful for you, and we look forward to talking to you again. Thanks for being here.